Okay, but seriously, I'm from the mainstream media, and I'm here to help. Tonight, I'm going to put all of you on the spot. Now, it's true, you folks are the shit right now. You're the hot thing. You're what everyone's talking about. Or at least you ought to be. As free market advocates, you are ground zero of the national debate, which makes you about as hot as Snooki. It could be the next big deal. No one wants to be caught thinking like a Democrat. Republicans need leadership. But if the liberty movement energy is to mean anything, it's going to be folks like you that actually takes it somewhere. That's your challenge. So all the vitriol, all the raw emotion, Dan Mays, that's just not going to get it. My thesis is you need to supply the intellectual architecture that makes the liberty movement experience matter, or the experiment matter. Because no matter what progressives and Democrats are saying about conservatives just standing for no, is that you guys actually have the more positive message. You have the life-affirming message. And if the American people see that, you could reform the nation. Some of you are operatives, some of you are donors, activists, some are researchers, some are writers, some are bloggers. Probably all of you are bloggers. You're part of the conservative influential class, right? I joined the editorial board 2 years ago. Up until that time, I'd always been a reporter. I very much adhered to the idea that I was objective, middle of the road, didn't get involved in trying to figure out the solutions to political problems. Didn't even really report on politics as a reporter. Well, in the last months I did, because I covered the Democratic National Convention. I started thinking about social policy in a much more serious way when I became a member of the Denver Post editorial board. And I started looking for text to read that would help me make sense of what goes on in the world. And I went back and one fall Saturday 2 Septembers ago and cracked open some old college textbooks that I'd long forgotten and looked at Adam Smith again. Looked at key passages for Wealth of Nations. To me, that was a very exciting, affirming type thing. I thought it was an overwhelmingly positive message. And I know that you guys think that way. But I think a lot of Americans don't think that way. They don't understand that about free markets. They don't see that free markets can structure a beneficial society. The problem begins for a lot of people with this incorrect notion that wealth is limited. Vast segments of our population either believe or act like they believe that Americans only enjoy their standard of living at the expense of others. They experience guilt when they ought to experience gratitude. They don't understand that wealth creates wealth. They don't understand that poor countries of the world are almost always poor, not because Americans are stealing all of their resources, but because their governments prevent free markets from forming and empowering their people. They're poor because overreaching governments won't let them make money. You need to frame the narrative so that more Americans understand that and understand the danger of that dynamic. A good example of that is right here in Denver with the libertarian Paul Pollock. He started a group 30 years ago and uses market forces to help poor and third world farmers create wealth. He first started by selling them very inexpensive pumps that are human powered that they could use to irrigate their fields. They then could do more than just feed the family. They could create additional vegetables and whatnot to sell to their neighbors. Soon little free markets formed, trade began to develop, kids got to go to school, communities were transformed, all using market forces. Seems to me that stories like that go far beyond the gotcha and the fun of the horse racing covering politics is what you guys ought to also make sure most Americans like me and the rest of us out here are finding out about. So yeah, you have to show us how wealth creates wealth at home as well. You've got to identify the government programs that get in the way of wealth creation and make those apparent to us. Too many Americans believe that here at home, only the rich get richer. I mean, you hear that all the time. that the system has become rigged somehow against the middle class, and especially against the poor. There's also the concern about the debt, but I think a lot of people just see that as a talking point and don't understand why debt is a problem. They hear a figure like $13.4 trillion in debt, and it doesn't mean anything to them. You've got to take that talking point and make it a legitimate discussion. We're on pace to have the second highest budget deficit ever this year, $1.3 trillion, after last year's whopping $1.6 trillion. It was only in February I wrote an editorial talking about the debt, and it was $12 trillion in February. Now it's almost $13.5 trillion. Because of unfunded liabilities, future obligations, it's actually somewhere closer to $56 trillion, or heading towards 60. Even Hillary Clinton says the debt is a problem.
What?
It's become an issue of national security. But again, a lot of folks like me, are how I used to be, we just think, well, a little debt's okay. We're a big country. But if you think about it this way, this is the size of the debt. Right now, the gross domestic product is just shy of $1 trillion, is $1 trillion shy of, I'm sorry. Right now, the debt is $1 trillion shy of GDP. All this country produces in a year is just barely ahead of our debt. And that's before you get to the unfunded obligations. You guys have to make that real to us. Make readers and others understand. Another widespread misunderstanding is that we ought to be able to depend on the government to protect us from every conceivable harm. I've got a great example. When I was in Pittsburgh working as a reporter, there was a terrible tragedy. A man, older man, driving a Cadillac, had an aneurysm in his stomach. Suddenly all the blood drains out from his system so quickly that he loses consciousness. His foot jams down on the accelerator. He goes roaring through. He'd only been driving like 25 miles per hour. But now he goes roaring through a park. His car is a missile, kills some people, hurts some people. And there's this huge public hue and cry over this accident. How could this possibly have happened? This was a lightning strike, right? Would anyone argue with that? An aneurysm passes out right there, right at that point in time, runs through the park. But there was such a big to-do over it, and the media certainly fanned the flames, that within months taxpayers were paying to ring that entire park with barricades. They weren't very pretty either, just as long as you get something up. So obviously you guys understand that. We've got to have courts and the rule of law and police and all those kinds of things, but there are things that we don't need to necessarily be protecting ourselves from. You need to make us see what those are. We need clever and sophisticated presentations of these dynamics, and these accounts need to deal with the realities of how free markets can correct and rebound from failure, so that when the markets implode, we don't believe that it's necessarily the government that has to step in and save us.